Yasir Khan Sahib to start us off with the Tilawat al-Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض الملك القدوس العزيز الحكيم هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين وآخرين منهم لما يلحقوا بهم وهو العزيز الحكيم ذلك فضل الله يؤتيه من يشاء والله ذو الفضل العظيم. Chapter 62, verses 1 to 5. I seek refuge with Allah from Satan the accursed. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful. Whatever is in the heavens and whatever is in the earth glorifies Allah, the sovereign, the holy, the mighty, the wise. He it is who has raised among the unlettered people a messenger from among themselves, who recites unto them his signs, and purifies them, and teaches them the book and wisdom, though before that they were in manifest error. And he will raise among others of them who have not yet joined them. He is the mighty, the wise. That is Allah's grace. He bestows it on whom He pleases, and Allah is the Lord of immense grace.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Asif Basit Sahib needs no introduction because many of us are aware of his services to Jamaat, and we have seen him on MTA, Rahe-Huda program, as many of you will remember. But he is the director of programming on MTA International. He's a Waqf-e-Zindagi by the grace of Allah. He's also, among many of his other duties, is the curator of the Ahmadiyya Archive and Research Center. So we're very pleased to have Asif Sahib with us. And also, he has so many responsibilities and duties that wasn't enough, I think, space on the poster to put all of these down. But another one is with regards to Al-Hakam, of all English-speaking members of Jamaat, I'm sure utilize Al-Hakam, and this was started under the direction of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih, Ayyadahullah Ta'ala bin Asl Aziz, and Asif Sahib had the responsibility given to him by beloved Hazur. Asif Sahib, the majority of Gillingham, or in the 60s, Gillingham Jamaat was inaugurated, and most of our members came from Kenya, and that is where we have a connection, of course, with you as well. But as you members may know, that his revered father, respected Maulana Abdul Basit Sahib, was a missionary who was stationed in Kenya for many years. Unfortunately, after I think that most of us had migrated, so that there is a relationship and a bond that we have with Basit Sahib in that respect. It is his first visit here to Gillingham, and I hope it won't be his last. It gives me great pleasure to invite him to come and address us on the Masih Jalsa. Asif Sahib.
Auzubillahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dr. Sahib, thank you very much for your kind words. Dr. Sahib has mentioned in my introduction two credentials, but I think the most important credential associated to myself, which we all share, is being an Ahmadi and being a, believing in the truthfulness of the promised Messiah alayhi salam, the Imam of the age, and that is what brings us together. Dr. Sahib instructed me that to speak in both languages, English and Urdu. So I'll go for English first because I'll run out of vocabulary very soon, and then I can conveniently switch to Urdu, inshallah. So so the credential that I mentioned that we all share is quite a hefty one. It's quite a heavy responsibility that we all share by claiming that we believe in the promised Messiah alayhi salatu wassalam. Because such a claim calls for a lot of responsibility to take, and it's quite challenging to say that I believe in the promised Messiah alayhi salam, because the moment you say that, you have to be different from others. Because otherwise, if we're not different from others, then there's absolutely no point in believing in the promised Messiah alayhi salam. Or in other words, God forbid, there was absolutely no purpose for the promised Messiah alayhi salatu wasalam to be sent to this world by Allah the Almighty. So, what is the purpose? What difference it should make? I mean, as if we just think about people, if somebody is an accountant, he would live accountancy, and if somebody is a librarian, he would live among books, and he'd be surrounded by books. And so, any other profession, any other if we leave careers aside and if we go into sports, if somebody is a footballer, I'm sure many of you are, you kind of, live it, you dream about it, you think about it, you daydream about it at times, some of you might even be doing that right now. But when it comes to being an Ahmadi, how is it possible that we are an Ahmadi, but the Ahmadiyya doesn't leave a mark on our day-to-day life? So if it isn't leaving a mark, then obviously it's something to be worried about. But then how do we actually know? How do we find out what is expected of us? What should make us different? And that, obviously, the answer is that it's the message of the promised Messiah ﷺ that we have to understand. What is that message? None of us can take it in the digestive form that we've been given it to us through our parents or through the classes that we have here. It's very, very, very useful. But then what we have to do is actually read it ourselves, experience it ourselves. Because if you say, there's certain things we don't know. I mean, we're not born with the knowledge of everything. It's in no way, I'm in no position to advise or guide anyone. So I am the first addressee of this conversation. So it's not just as simple as that, to say, I can't understand, so there you go, the whole of the pile, it looks good on the shelf, and that's about it. It's I've actually had a gentleman in MTA coming to me and saying, do you have a brown set of Ruhani Khazain? I said, what do you mean brown? I mean, people have asked about, the computerized or the 1984 one and the one. So what do you mean by brown? He said, no, I need it for the props because the rest of the set is brown. So I need to kind of match the colors. So that isn't sufficient, just to have them on the shelf. We will have to pick them up. We will have to see how we can actually learn them and actually know what the message is. Because it's not as simple as, you ask, majority of us when asked, what is the difference that the Prophet ﷺ made? The first answer that pops to the mind is, he came and told that Jesus Christ has passed away, Isa alayhi salam has passed away. So the purpose of a prophet who was awaited for 1400 years cannot merely be to come and announce the death of somebody. Anybody can do that. Most of us do. Nisar Orchard Sahib does that every morning or every other morning. So that cannot be a sufficient enough duty for a prophet who was awaited for 1400 years to come and say, Jesus has passed away. What else? And it gets us thinking. but we have to have an answer. What exactly was it what difference did he make? What makes him so special that he was prophesied 1400 years ago? So when he was to come, he must have come, he has come with a very special message. Where is that message? Of course, at this moment, we don't have the time to go deep into the message of the Promised Messiah Islam. Like I said, the need of reading the books of the Promised Messiah Islam. And I'm sure we've all heard this so many times. You know, I think the one thing that Hazrat Khalifatul Masih mentions the most in his sermons and in his sittings with the youth, Waqfi is usually about, most of the times, it's about you need to read the books of the Promised Messiah Islam. But how to do it? Because fine, I mean, you know, most of them are in Urdu. Not all of them are translated into English language. But then, like I said, I mean, where there is a will, there is a way. So all of us learn Arabic language, maybe not understand it as much as we should, but then we all learn. It is a foreign language. It is kind of a different language. So we all learn that. So, but let's say, all right, okay, fine. You know, but those that are translated into English language, it's about going to them, opening them up, reading them. But how do we do that? Everybody has their own way. Like I said, I'm not here to give any guidance or advice or anything. When you speak to people, they say, I found it better reading it in chronological order, so I started with Brahim and went all the way to, in chronological order to Peygham-e-Sulam. Some say, I find it easier to read, after the books that he wrote after his claim, and then I read those, and then I come back, and then forth, etc. But then there are many ways, because one of the things, the most important part of the message of the Promised Messiah ﷺ is, because he didn't bring a new Quran, he didn't bring a new Sharia, he didn't bring a new law, everything was there. So the importance of the message cannot only be that he said, well, you should, say your namaz. That teaching was already there. You should pay your zakat. That teaching was already there. So what was it? 1400 years apart from the time of the revelation of the Holy Quran, the Quran was seen to have become obsolete. It wasn't seen as practicable anymore. It wasn't seen as something that could be believed in. It didn't sound too tempting to be tempted by dates or, streams and springs of milk in the hereafter. So, and so many other things. So it was seen as if it was something which could not be practiced, and people were giving up their faith in Islam and the Holy Quran. The message within the books of the Prophet ﷺ, if I summarize, is all about the understanding of the Holy Quran. I give you one example here, the book Jang-e-Muqaddas, which is about a debate that the Prophet ﷺ had with the Christian missionaries. If you start reading it, and it's been translated into English, The Holy War is how the title has been translated. You start reading it, and every 4 or 5 lines, the Prophet ﷺ quotes a verse of the Holy Quran. Every 4 or 5 lines. And it seems as if he was a Hafiz-e-Quran, as if he knew the Holy Quran by heart. I'm sure he did. It's nowhere in the books, but a testimony from his son, Hazrat Mirza Sultan Ahmad Sahib, he said, the Holy Prophet, he said, my father used to have a small copy of the Holy Quran, which he would always keep with himself. And I always saw him read it, and I would see his gaze fixed on a page for hours at times. And he must have read, and I'm not quoting, but I'm paraphrasing the statement of his son, as Mirza Sultan Ahmed. He said, I'm very sure that the Prophet ﷺ must have read that copy of the Holy Quran about 10,000 times. So that literature that we know by the name of Ruhani Khazain, the books of the Prophet ﷺ, is filled with knowledge of the Holy Quran. How do we, in this day and age, still practice a teaching or a book that was revealed 1400 years? It's a lot of time if you think about it, 1400 years ago. So it's all about looking into the book, seeing how do I make sense of it? Where do I start? I mean, I can share my personal experience. When I was told by my father growing up, and from other elders that you should read the books of the Prophet ﷺ, I would start with Brahine Ahmadiyya and I would give up after 4 or 5 pages, and I would say, I can't grasp this ever. And then after another couple of months, after another reminder, I would start all over again. And then I started off with saying, all right, no, I think I need to read the smaller books, I need to do this, I need to do that. I struggled. It's challenging, it's not easy, I do agree. And I do admit and I do confess that even somebody like myself who was born in Pakistan, brought up in Pakistan, Urdu being my first language, it's challenging. So what do? We have to find some way of doing it. Otherwise, like I said, we're never going to understand the teaching. It's never going to leave a mark. It's never going to make a difference. I found it easier by going to the index, looking at the various topics that were there, not the table of contents. There is no table of contents. That is what some of, especially the younger generation, will find strange, because we're used to reading a certain type of books, written in certain formats and printed and published in certain formats. So it always has a table of contents, and then it's going to have a foreword, and then there'll be a preface, and then etc., etc. There is absolutely nothing like that. But that shouldn't discourage us. There is no table of contents in the Holy Quran, yet we all read it and will continue to read it and will ask and urge our children also and our next generations to read it. So just because a book seems different in its format is not sufficient to put us off and say, or make us put the book away. So you have to, like they say, no pain, no gain. So we have to go through some kind of difficulty, as it might seem, but then the gain at the end is that message which should make us different from others. Otherwise, if we don't know the message of the Prophet ﷺ, we might as well be a Sunni or a Shia or a Christian or a Jew for that matter. Then it absolutely makes no difference. Because if we don't understand the message of the Prophet ﷺ, then there's no point in being a Muslim anyway. So we might as well be anything, even an atheist. So to get to that message, we need to find our ways. You go to the index, you see certain things. For example, let me tell you, when I started this, I came across a conference that had happened in Calcutta in 1881, I think it was. And I was intrigued. And then I came back to I went into the book, read it, came back to see the Prophet ﷺ mentioning the Reverend Hector, right? And I was thinking, who is that? And there was a whole list of names of Christian missionaries. And I was just, amazed. I said, how did the Prophet ﷺ know about all of this that was going on around him? He would mention how the coronation of King Edward VII had taken place, and what kind of a Bible was gifted to him, and what was in the Bible, the Apocrypha, which is a part of Christian literature, which is kind of, a gray area. Most of the Christians don't include it in the scripture, but some of them do. So the Prophet ﷺ said that there has been a huge debate around what kind of a Bible to be given to King Edward VII on his coronation. And the Christian missionaries, even the Church of England, and even the Archbishop of Canterbury, does not know what to include and what not to include. And Huzur said, and I happen to have a copy of this Bible. I went in pursuit of this Bible. So I went to the central records of the Church of England, Lambeth Palace, that's their headquarters. And I went through their archives, searching for the Bible. And then because of what the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned, that even the Archbishop of Canterbury doesn't know what to be included and what not to be included in the Holy Bible, I requested for the correspondence. It wasn't very straightforward, as it sounds when I'm telling you. So I went through the correspondence that had taken place between the Church of England, the Houses of Parliament, and the Palace, trying to get to what to be included and what not to be included. And to get to that Bible and to get to that correspondence, like I said, it wasn't straightforward for somebody like myself who lived in London and had only just to spend £8. That's how much it was. I know the fares have gone up from Morden to, to the underground station, Westminster, and go into the library, into their archives. It took me days, weeks, I would say, to get to the truth that had been already told by the Prophet ﷺ. How he's sitting there in India, in the remotest part of India, how was it possible for him to know and to share that fact? So, and like I said, so that was my intrigue. That was how, and without intrigue, things don't happen. You have to have a certain level of intrigue. You have to find out. Why would you have that intrigue? Why would one have that intrigue? When we're talking about a man who lived about 150, more than that, years ago, 132, 3, if we take the inception of the Jamaat. But what kind of a connection could we have with such a man who lived so many years ago? So there has to be that element of connection, and I come to that now. How can we develop that connection with the person whose books we've always been told to read? That connection has to be there, or we won't be able to grasp the knowledge, and beyond that, much more above that, the feeling, the passion that is there with which he communicated all of those treasures to us. So how do we do that? Now, we've spoken about the books written by the Prophet ﷺ. We now come to how maybe we can inculcate a love for the man, because that is essential. So if we haven't read his writings, and if we haven't read his life, his biography, then unfortunately it's very, if not impossible, it's near impossible that we'll develop any kind of connection with the person that we claim to love, with the person that we claim to be, the founder of our community, the person that we think was sent by Allah the Almighty as the last form of reform to this world. So going through his life is important, because only then we can know that the books that he has written, the voluminous work that we have in 23 volumes, and there are many books in one volume, it's much more. We usually think it's just 86, but it's much more than that. He'd started writing even before. We've been able to trace some of the material, but we haven't got all of it. But he was a regular and a prolific writer from a long time before his claim. So there is a lot that he's written for our guidance, to tell us what Allah the Almighty wants from us, how he wants us to practice the Holy Quran in this day and age. But how he wrote it, he wasn't living in the time of MS Word, and he wasn't living in the time of when you've all of these, word processing facilities, where you can save a copy, where you can share a copy, where you can do whatever you like to the copy of whatever you're writing. So he mentions, when you read through the life of the Prophet ﷺ, that is where he tells you so many things, and that is where biographers tell you so many things that make you fall in love with the man. You want it or not. It is almost certain that it will happen if one reads with a clean and clear heart. The Prophet ﷺ said, in the time of Ibrahim, I did not have sufficient funds. I used to write the book, the manuscript. I used to take it to the scribe. He would write it down in a more legible, kind of way. Then I would take that manuscript to the printers. I'd, take a bull cart and spend hours and hours, even days, maybe the whole day, to get to the printer publisher, leave it with them, then go after a few weeks to see the proofs, read the proof. I was the proofreader, leave the proofs back with the publisher or the printer, then come back. Then when they were printed, I would go and pick them up, because there was no delivery services as we have. There was no DHL or anything like that. So he would have to go back, bring the books, and then distribute them, only for the opponents to tear them into two and send them back to him. How discouraging. So that is, you can't see that in the apart unless you read the life, the biography of the promised Messiah alayhi salatu wasalam. How he spent, I mean, isn't it strange? You know, one incident will leave you with an understanding of more than many, many things. For instance, he said, I once asked God, I requested Allah Ta'ala, that, oh Allah, you've given me such a huge responsibility. How do you expect me to do it if I have I mean, obviously, these are not his words. These are my, modern complaining words. We've all got used to this complaining thing. So he said, there's such a huge responsibility that you've given to me. How would I do it with the two physical ailments that I have? He used to have vertigo. He used to have constant, phases of headaches. And because he was a diabetic as well, he's mentioned that he had to respond to the call of nature, he says himself, up to 100 times at times. So he said, I requested Allah that, oh Allah, can you alleviate this? Can you rid me of these disease if this is the type of the mission that you're assigning me? And he said, instantly I got the answer. You will not be relieved of them. They will stay with you. No complaints, no nothing. He carries on, maybe with even more passion than he actually had before. He was writing one of his books. His son Mirza Mubarak Ahmed, 7-8 years old, falls ill, gravely ill, and the Prophet ﷺ is informed. The Prophet ﷺ, he loved his children. He went to the bedside of his child and looked after him. What did he do? He did whatever he could, and then he came back when he realized that the child isn't going to survive. He went back to writing his book that he was writing. And then he was informed about the death of the child. He went back to the room, to the family, looked at his dead son, consoled his family, and while arrangements for the funeral were being made, he went back to the work that he was doing. He was then called that Hazur, the funeral procession, the janaza is ready, so can you please come? And then he went to the burial, came back to work. He was writing right to the last minute of his life. Paygam-e-Sulh, that was the last book that he has written, and he was in Lahore when he was doing that. So even in those days, I mean, he was ill, he was weak, but he continued to write. So, and when I recover, I go back to writing and start my work again. So the works that have been written so painstakingly by the promised Messiah ﷺ, it would be very unfair of us to not even read them or just say, oh, I can't understand, so I'll just put them aside. I can't do this. Whatever I listen to in various classes and ijtimas is enough for me, and that's sufficient, and I don't need to go into all of this detail. We must, every time we intend, or when we plan that we're going to read the books of the Prophet ﷺ, we must bear in mind the pain, the difficulties, torture, I would say, that he went through to write those beautiful writings that have got, the guidance. Like I said, it's the last guidance that was ever going to come from Allah the Almighty. In the form of Sharia, in the form of the scripture, the Holy Quran. That was final. But reform and understanding of that, of the book, of the Holy Quran, and of the practices of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and everything to do with our faith, the final reform that was going to come, the final understanding that was going to come was through the Prophet ﷺ. And very fortunately, to be further explained, in the face of the very fast changing world by his khulafa later on. So with this request, I will conclude here in English language that it's essential for us, and when I say us, obviously myself addressed first of all, above all, that we must remember the painstaking process that the Prophet ﷺ went through to produce the marvelous works, which are the only guarantee of the survival of faith on the face of this earth. اب میں اردو میں تھوڑا سا اس کا خلاصتاً میں اپنی گزارشات میں بتا دیتا ہوں. ایک تو میں نے جو سب سے پہلے جو گزارش پہلے میں نے کی تھی وہ یہ تھی کہ کسی بھی طرح سے کوئی یہاں پہ نصیحت وغیرہ کرنے کا، سب میرے بزرگ ہیں، مجھ سے بہتر جانتے ہیں، میں صرف خیالات کا اظہار کر رہا ہوں، اور اس میں سب سے پہلا مخاطب میں خود ہوں کہ ہمیں جو چیز احمدی بناتی ہے وہ صرف دعویٰ نہیں ہے کہ ہم دعویٰ کر لیں کہ جی میں نے بیعت کر لی ہے، جس طرح کہ سب ہمیں بار بار اس چیز کی طرف توجہ دلاتے ہیں کہ یہ کافی نہیں ہے کہ ہم یہ کہیں کہ میں نے بیعت کر لی اور سمجھیں کہ بیعت ہو گئی، بلکہ اصل چیز جو ضروری ہے وہ یہ ہے کہ ہم حضرت مسیح موعود علیہ السلام کے پیغام کو سمجھیں، اور اگر ہماری زندگی پہ حضرت اقدس مسیح موعود علیہ السلام کا پیغام کوئی اثر نہیں چھوڑتا، اگر ہماری روزمرہ زندگی کسی بھی طرح سے کوئی اثر حضرت مسیح علیہ السلام کے پیغام کا قبول نہیں کر رہی، تو پھر کہیں پہ کچھ نہ کچھ گڑبڑ ضرور ہے. کیونکہ پھر اگر احمدی ہونا ہمیں دوسروں سے مختلف نہیں بناتا، ہماری زندگی کو تبدیل نہیں کرتا، تو پھر ہم احمدی ہو جائیں، ہم نان احمدی مسلمان ہو جائیں، ہم عیسائی ہو جائیں، ہم یہودی ہو جائیں، ہم جو مرضی ہو جائیں، اس سے پھر وہ ایک ہی بات ہے، وہ برابر ہے. تو وہ کیا ہے جو فرق پڑ سکتا ہے یا جو فرق پڑنا چاہیے، وہ ظاہر ہے وہ ساری بات جو ہے، وہ سارا پیغام جو ہے وہ حضرت علیہ السلام کی کتب میں لکھا ہے، آپ کی کتابوں میں، آپ کی تصنیفات میں ہے، اور جس کے بارے میں حضرت علیہ السلام فرمایا کہ وہ خزائن جو ہزاروں سال سے مدفون تھے اب میں دیتا ہوں اگر کوئی ملے امیدوار. تو اس شعر کو بھی ہم بہت دفعہ سنتے ہیں، بہت دفعہ سن کے اس میں سے گزر جاتے ہیں. اس کے اندر بھی بڑے معنی چھپے ہوئے ہیں. ایک تو یہ کہ وہ خزانے جو ہزاروں سال سے مدفون تھے، جس چیز ہزاروں سال لگ گئے مسیح موعود کے آنے میں تاکہ وہ آ کے اس دور کے مطابق ہمیں اسلام کا فہم دے سکے، اسلام کی سمجھ دے سکے. اور اب میں دیتا ہوں اگر کوئی ملے امیدوار. کتاب گھر میں رکھ لینے سے نہیں آئے گا. وہ امیدوار کیسے بنیں گے، کینڈیڈیٹ کیسے بنیں گے اس چیز کے کہ میں لینا چاہتا ہوں، میں حاصل کرنا چاہتا ہوں. وہ صرف کتابیں خرید کے گھر میں رکھ لینے سے حاصل نہیں ہوگا. کتابیں تو پورا سیٹ خرید کے آپ اگر ہمارے مخالفین کے کوئی، اگر آپ نے اگر آپ نے کبھی دیکھے ہیں ان کے ولاگز وغیرہ یا ان کے پروگرام وغیرہ، پورا سیٹ روحانی خزائن کا پیچھے رکھا ہوتا ہے انہوں نے. تو شیلفوں کے اوپر پڑے رہنے سے تو اس نے کچھ بھی نہیں کرنا، اسے پڑھنا پڑے گا. اور جب ہم اسے پڑھیں گے تو اس سے ہم اس کے ساتھ ایک اور چیز جو پڑھنی ضروری ہے، کیونکہ حضرت مسیح موعود علیہ السلام کی زندگی کو جب تک نہیں جانیں گے، آپ نے کس طرح کی زندگی گزاری، اس وقت تک ہم حضرت مسیح علیہ السلام سے محبت نہیں کر سکتے، اور نہ آپ کی کتابوں سے محبت کر سکتے ہیں، نہ اس کو ہم لوگ ٹرولی اپریشیٹ، نہ ہم اس کو صحیح معنوں میں اس کی قدر کر سکتے ہیں. تو جب ہم زندگی پڑھتے ہیں تو ہمیں بہت ساری چیزوں کا پتہ چلتا ہے، بہت سارے اعتراضوں کے جواب ملتے ہیں. مثلا ایک بڑا اعتراض کیا جاتا ہے کہ جی حضرت علیہ السلام کے بارے میں لکھا ہے سیرۃ المہدی میں کہ جیب میں جو ہے وہ گڑ کیوں رکھا کرتے تھے. تو اس پہ وہ بڑا ہنسی مذاق اڑاتے رہتے ہیں، سب کچھ کرتے رہتے ہیں. لیکن جب آپ زندگی پڑھتے ہیں تو پتہ چلتا ہے کہ حضرت علیہ السلام ڈائبیٹک تھے، ڈائبٹیز کا مرض تھا آپ کو. اور ہر ایسا مرض آج کل جو ہے وہ گڑ نہیں رکھتے. آج کل ہمارے جن لوگوں کو یہ بیماری ہوتی ہے وہ اپنے ساتھ کوئی نہ کوئی کوئی سویٹ، کوئی ٹافی، کوئی ایسی چیز، کوئی میٹھی چیز جو ہے وہ جیب میں ضرور رکھتے ہیں کہ جسٹ ان کیس اگر ہائپوگلیسیمیا کا ان کو ایک دم سے ہوتا ہے، شوگر ڈپ ہو جاتی ہے بہت زیادہ، تو وہ فوری طور پہ اس کو لے سکیں. وہ حضرت مسیح علیہ السلام جس زمانے میں رہتے تھے، ہم آج سے 150 سال پرانی بات کر رہے ہیں. تو اس لیے جب تک ہم یہ چیزیں جانیں گے نہیں، اس وقت تک ہم یہ بہت سارے اعتراضوں کے جواب نہیں دے سکتے. جب تک ہم اس تکلیف کا اندازہ نہیں کریں گے جس میں سے گزر کے حضرت مسیح موعود علیہ السلام نے اپنی تحریر فرمائی، ہم اس درد کو محسوس نہیں کریں گے، اس وقت تک ان کتابوں کے اندر جو چھپے ہوئے خزانے ہیں ان تک جانے کی کوئی تمنا ہی دل میں نہیں ہوگی. جب تک ہمیں یہ نہیں پتہ چلے گا کہ حضرت علیہ السلام نے فرمایا کہ میں بعض اوقات لکھتے لکھتے غشی کا عالم مجھ پہ طاری ہو جاتا ہے، میں اس غشی سے اٹھتا ہوں تو میں دوبارہ لکھنا شروع کر دیتا ہوں. اور اسی طرح، اور جس طرح میں نے ابھی گزارش کی، مطلب حضرت علیہ السلام کی زندگی کو پڑھیں گے تو پتہ چلے گا کہ کس طرح حضرت مسیح موعود علیہ السلام اپنے بچے کی وفات حضرت مرزا مبارک احمد صاحب جب فوت ہوئے، کس طرح حضور کام میں مصروف تھے، کس طرح حضور کام سے اٹھ کے بچے کی پہلے عیادت کے لیے اور اس کی دیکھ بھال کے لیے تشریف لائے. اس کے بعد جب یہ لگا کہ شاید اب امکان نہیں ہے، تقدیر ظاہر ہو کے رہے گی، پھر حضور اپنے کام پہ واپس تشریف لے گئے. پھر جب بچے کی وفات ہوئی پھر حضور تشریف لائے، جنازے پہ تشریف لے گئے، واپس آ کے اپنا کام دوبارہ شروع کر دیا. تو ان تکالیف کا جب تک ہمیں اندازہ نہیں ہوگا، ہمیں احساس نہیں ہوگا، ہم صحیح معنوں میں قدر کر بھی نہیں سکیں گے. پڑھنے کے لیے بھی ایک زیادہ تمنا پیدا ہوگی. اگر ہم مثلا بہت سارے لوگ ہیں، آپ ان سے پوچھیں، لٹریچر میں لوگوں کا اپنا اپنا ٹیسٹ ہوتا ہے. کسی کو شیکسپیئر پسند ہوگا، کسی کو چوسر پسند ہوگا، کسی کو ملٹن پسند ہوگا، کسی کو کوئی اور کسی کو کوئی پسند ہوگا. اردو میں غالب پسند ہوگا، میر پسند، اقبال پسند ہوگا. کلام پڑھا ہے، اچھا بھی لگا ہے، لیکن کیا کبھی آپ کو انس پیدا ہوا؟ کیا کبھی آپ کو تعلق محسوس ہوا ان کے ساتھ؟ ٹھیک ہے نا. آپ جان کیٹس کو پڑھتے ہیں، اس کی شاعری کے درد کو پڑھتے ہوئے آپ کو یہ محسوس ہوتا ہے کہ یار اس کو کیا غم لگ گیا تھا اور یہ کتنے 100 سال کی عمر کو پا کے مرا ہے جو اتنا زبردست اس نے کلام لکھا ہے. لیکن آپ کو پتہ چلتا ہے وہ تو 28 سال کی عمر میں فوت ہو گیا تھا. تو اس کے ساتھ آپ کی انڈرسٹینڈنگ بالکل مختلف ہو جاتی ہے. تو اگر دنیا کے لٹریچر میں اگر اس قسم کے سلسلے ہیں جس میں آپ کو انڈرسٹینڈنگ آف دا لائف آف دا رائٹر، اگر وہ اتنا بڑا امپیکٹ وہاں کر سکتی ہے، تو اس آدمی کے بارے میں سوچیں جس کے بارے میں جس کی آپ نے بیعت کی ہوئی ہے، جس کی ہم بیعت کی تجدید ہر سال کرتے ہیں، اور حضرت خلیفۃ المسیح کے ہاتھ پہ جن کے پیغام کو ہم کہتے ہیں کہ ہم نے دنیا تک پہنچانا ہے، اگر دل میں اس آدمی کے لیے محبت نہیں ہوگی تو بڑا مشکل ہو جائے گا. اللہ تعالیٰ ممکن تو ہر چیز کو کر دیتا ہے، لیکن مشکل بڑا ہو جائے گا. اور ایک اچھا سچا احمدی ہونے کے لیے ضروری یہ ہے کہ ہم حضرت مسیح علیہ السلام کی تحریرات کو ضرور پڑھیں. ان کو پڑھنے کا مختلف، میں نے یہ بھی گزارش کی تھی انگریزی میں کہ اس کو پڑھنے کا ہر کسی کا اپنا طریق ہو سکتا ہے. اس کا پڑھنے کا کوئی ایک لگا بندہ مسلم علیہ تعالیٰ نے رہنمائی فرمائی. اسلم سیراب نے موجودہ اثر نے ہمارے خلیفہ مسیح خام سید اللہ تعالیٰ ابن عزیز، انہوں نے کئی موقعوں پہ بتایا کہ یوں بھی کر سکتے ہو، یوں بھی. ان کو بھی سننا چاہیے، دیکھنا چاہیے کہ کس طرح سے خلفاء نے رہنمائی فرمائی ہے. اپنے طریقے پہ جا کے آپ دیکھ لیں، کوئی انڈیکس میں جا کے دیکھ لیں، مثلاً کوئی اچھی چیز لگتی ہے، کوئی ایسا موضوع لگتا ہے جو آپ کو لگتا ہے کہ یہ تو مجھے بہت دلچسپی ہو سکتی ہے اس کے اندر، اور وہ کوئی بھی ہو سکتے ہیں. بہت ٹھوس علمی سے نہ بھی آپ شروع کریں تو اسی سے ہو سکتا ہے. دوسرا ایسا فرمایا کہ آپ زلزلے بڑی کثرت سے آئیں گے، ٹھیک ہے نہیں، زلزلے دنیا اپنے اختتام کی طرف بڑی تیزی سے بڑھتی جا رہی ہے. یہ ایسے موضوعات ہیں جو انڈیکس میں لکھے ہوں گے، آپ کی توجہ کو پکڑ سکتے ہیں. ایک چیز میں جو اپنا جو میں تجربہ بتا رہا تھا، اینڈ آئی ول کم بیک ٹو انگلش فار دیٹ، میں نے جس طرح کہا کہ سے فار ایگزامپل یو گو بیک ٹو انڈیکس میں دیکھا دنیا اپنے تیزی سے اپنے اختتام کی طرف بڑھتی جا رہی ہے. آپ وہاں جائیں، ایسا بہت کم ہوگا کہ آپ وہ 4 لائنیں پڑھ کے دوبارہ انڈیکس میں آ جائیں. یو ول اینڈ اپ ریڈنگ quite a few pages and you will end up searching for the verses of the Holy Quran quoted therein. ان کو قرآن میں جا کے آپ دیکھیں اس کے آگے کیا تھا، اس کے آگے کیا تھا، اس کے پیچھے کیا تھا، کیا چل رہی تھی بات، قرآن میں یہ آیت کہاں پہ آتی ہے، قرآن میں کس جگہ پہ ہے. سو حضرت اقدس مسیح علیہ السلام کی تحریرات دراصل اس زمانے کے لیے اور آئندہ آنے والے ہر زمانے کے لیے قرآن کریم کی تفسیر ہیں. وہی ہے جو ہمیں دوسرے مسلمانوں سے مختلف بناتی ہیں اور بنانا چاہیے، اور وہی ہے جو ہمیں ہمیشہ دوسرے لوگوں سے، دوسرے مذاہب سے مختلف اور انشاءاللہ ایز اے جماعت ممتاز رکھے گی. آپ کا بہت شکریہ. جزاکم اللہ.
Jazakum Allah, very, very illuminating and quite humbling. In fact, if you don't feel ashamed about ourselves after listening to this, I think we will. I'll have this recorded, and you should listen to it again, because it is quite humbling, and how frivolously we take the books of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So a good lesson learned. We have a few minutes. If anybody would like to ask any questions to Asif Sahib.
Your religions, and in it you mentioned something about Mr. Pigott, and I think you went to Somerset, and if you can just refresh my memory, I'd be grateful for that.
it was published in 2 episodes, so you can imagine how long it was, and I'm sure you've read it. It's quite long. So very briefly, the whole of that article, all of that research was about a priest called John Hughes Smythe Pigott, who lived in London and claimed to be not only the Messiah, but to be God, as Christians, the divinity that they attach to Christ. So the Prophet ﷺ, again, it's astonishing when you think, Prophet ﷺ in Qadian receives the newsletter that he used to publish, Ark of the Covenant, as he called it. And I feel very fortunate to again have seen the same newsletter that must have reached the Prophet ﷺ. I mean, a similar, same copy, not same copy, same issue, but the one that must have reached the Prophet ﷺ in a tiny, tiny town in Qadian, in India. And he wrote back to Pigott, and Pigott had a huge establishment. He had a huge following. The church is still there in Hackney, in London, where you can still go and see. It's quite, it's a towering kind of a structure, and it's quite overwhelming when you look at it. So the Prophet ﷺ wrote to Pigott saying that this is such a bold and such a shameful claim to make that you should immediately take it back. So otherwise, one who is not true will die in the life of the other. Now, that was something that, it's an allegation as well, and I personally wanted to go and have a look what it was all about. So went through a lot of his documents and to see how this must have unfolded. And we couldn't really get to see something where he might have repeated the same claim which he repeated in November 1902, standing on the stairs of his church in Clapton, Hackney, and he never claimed that. But then how the story unfolded, how he actually ended, how shameful it was. But I'll cut the long story short. I was able to track down, to trace his granddaughter, who lived in Sheffield, and that again is a very long story. And like Dr. Sab said, this is not, inshallah, my last visit to Gillingham for some of the time. But then, so I spoke to her. I said, what do you think about the claims of your grandfather? She said, I think it was all rubbish. I said, do you have anybody who claims to be a member of the Agapemini, the community that he had established around his? She said, there's absolutely nobody. It's all got dismantled, finished. So not a single person in the whole wide world claiming to be a follower of Reverend Pigott, who was in London, who has his own newsletters, who was surrounded by the best possible kind of communication technology, newspaper press, etc., and everything that you want, all the amenities and the facilities that you can have living in London. And then we had the Prophet ﷺ living in a very small village in Qadian, yet the community of the Prophet ﷺ prevails, and the community of Reverend John Hughes Smythe Pigott has vanished into thin air. I must, however, mention here, thank you very much for asking this, because it's related to the Prophet Messiah Day. His granddaughter said, I'm not very sure what to do with it, because she had all the archives, all of his letters and everything, and his stamp, which was always on everything. So she said, I've tried asking universities and they don't seem to be too interested. Is there anything you can do? And I said, yes, I can take all of this with me, and we'll preserve them very professionally. We do that at the MD archives. That's what we do. I mean, very small pieces of paper. We pay them by the hour. It's very professionally done. Sometimes, for a very small piece of paper, you can be paying £1,000. So I said, we'll preserve them. So she said, all right, can you come on such and such day? And, so we decided. It was March. But only afterwards I realized that it was the Prophet Messiah Day in 2016, when I went over to Sheffield to meet her. And when she handed over all of the archives of Pigott, including any remains that could be any kind of reminder of the gentleman called Pigott, all of that was given to me in archive boxes, and I was able to bring them over and present them to Hazrat Khalifatul Masih, and then preserve them in MD archives, which obviously is, all of these departments and everything, it's all Hazrat Sahab's, isn't it? So it's good that you asked. I was able to tell this fact that any remains of Pigot now actually are in the custody of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih.